I've never seen a show go through a more polarized period than Family Guy. It was a genuine underdog after it got cancelled. Twice. And it seems like you can't go anywhere without hearing, did you know Family Guy survived getting cancelled twice? Shut up! We know! And during the 2010s, the cartoon community pretty much used Family Guy as a scapegoat for content. I mean, I'm kind of doing that right now. However, it was commonplace to call Family Guy bad and then everyone clapped after. Usually you'd feel like a contrarian for calling a piece of media bad, because it gets attention and the YouTube algorithm loves negative content. But I just became apathetic towards what I feel is illegitimate hate.
This leads to another cutaway with nothing of substance happening. Either be funny or get to the plot.
So I made a video defending modern Family Guy. I've never changed my opinion on Family Guy, just to make it clear. But it's become so comically obvious that the public sentiment has changed. Slightly. I also believe the way we consume media now has also changed public perception. We love overarching shows. I believe that the advent of streaming made that clear, with the concept of binge watching and dropping entire seasons of shows at once. And ironically, sentiment towards that has also changed. But you can't ignore that it did contribute to the meteoric rise of streaming, because audiences weren't used to watching shows back to back to back because of cable television. And Family Guy was conventional cable. You'd have Family Guy sandwiched in between other shows in the exact same vein, each having mildly different humour, not to mention you can switch channels at any time you want to, which was a problem Family Guy had to adapt to as it continued running. And it's common knowledge that the writing style of Family Guy has changed since it started, using more cutaway gags, relying on contemporary issues that get aired 9 months later. Why?
Followed closely by the three genderless wise people on their bird scooters, Tig Notaro for some reason, and of course the little drum of them, because God forbid we call a boy a boy.
And the characters of the show becoming flanderized. It's undeniable that a show will change if it airs for a long period of time, and each show that I know that has been long running encounters a lot of issues, really. I feel as if Family Guy has had considerably less problems than its peers. Like, I've seen critique for the continuity in Family Guy, but respectfully, it's pretty much impossible to have perfect continuity in a long running show, and Family Guy has contradicted itself a lot, which indicates a lack of respect for long-time viewers and not respecting the precedents the show has set before. But I believe that the show had to keep finding ways to create new stories, and it had to naturally change over time to adapt to being long-running. As whenever the show was conceived, it was impossible to predict whether it would still be airing in 1 year. Never mind 22. And sometimes retcons are needed in a show to, ironically, create more cohesion, because contextually, the show is being written differently now because it's long term, and I hinted towards it earlier on, but I believe Family Guy has aged better than The Simpsons. And that's because I believe Family Guy was before its time, in that the shift to seemingly random humour coincided with internet humour, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that these two running alongside each other collide to make Family Guy an entertaining piece of media. Firstly, the internet, changing over time, is inevitable. Whenever Family Guy aired, there was no means to watch internet video in the same capacity we watch it today. YouTube only came out in 2005. Computers looked like that, and phones looked completely different. I feel like context is so relevant for talking about long-running media, because the context is that the world we live in is changing incrementally, and change has to be made to keep up. You have to remember who Family Guy was originally made for. Being aired first in 1999, it would mainly appeal to young adults who, let's just say, were born in 1980. Media in general was a lot more conservative back then. The Simpsons was in its heyday. South Park hadn't aired the episode that swore 200 times, which really busted open the woodworks for more raunchy media. I guess I'm trying to say, the envelope wasn't pushed yet on what could be done on television. Not to mention, Family Guy has been shrouded in comparisons to The Simpsons ever since it aired, because to be fair, the two are conceptually very similar. And modern Family Guy is different from modern Simpsons in terms of humour, so Family Guy did distance themselves. Audiences wouldn't have been happy either way, because it's either the writers could have continued being called a worse version of The Simpsons, or the writers could have changed to distance themselves. I'm not saying that the shift in Family Guy's writing is objectively a good thing, but remembering the historical context and the market it's in is really important. South Park was the initial one to push the envelope on what could be said and done on television, and I've always held the opinion that it had smarter, albeit more crude comedy than Family Guy. It led the market in that aspect. I'll state that generally, Family Guy's humour became more on the nose, more graphic and less intelligent than the humour of South Park.
Peter, what are you doing? Crack? What the fuck?
And if you're watching an episode in its entirety, South Park would probably be the better option. But again, it's context. I was born in 2004 and I began watching Family Guy after it supposedly fell off in terms of writing. But I watched the DVDs of season 1 to 3 when I was away in the boonies of Ireland. So I had a really stark contrast between the golden age of Family Guy and when it fell off. I like both of them for different reasons. The main reason Family Guy was revived from the dead was because of high DVD sales. Audiences in TV weren't really interested in the show at the time, and that really only changed after the DVDs popped off. Whenever I was a kid, I did watch Family Guy when it came on TV, agree, but the medium of cable television skips out parts of episodes, so you don't always have 100% context for what's going on, unless you watch it from the start. And I'm not saying there's a definite correlation, but it's common knowledge that the attention spans have been decreasing over time, which would naturally lead to TV having to adapt to that to survive. Like, I genuinely think a change in attention span is a reasonable explanation for Family Guy's jokes becoming less intelligent over time. And it's not like the writers are incompetent either. The episode Stewie and Brian is pointed to as being peak Family Guy, but it wasn't the highest viewed episode of the season. The writers just wanted to prove a point that they weren't bad. It's unreasonable to hold a show accountable by saying it doesn't take itself seriously when there's little financial incentive. Not to mention, if earlier seasons' ratings were why the show was cancelled, then why are people clamoring to return to that formula? Furthermore, if they did return to that formula, it wouldn't make sense. It's natural for the beginning seasons of shows to be used to establish characters and what works and what doesn't work. I don't comprehend why people want Family Guy to strip itself back from sensationalist humour and return to its roots. If we've already known these characters for 20 plus years and the sensationalist humour has given the show its own unique identity, what I do understand is Family Guy's flanderization being criticised. I do think that the hyperbolic writing of characters does lend itself better to the humour Family Guy has tried to establish in recent years, and I do understand that writers naturally can get bored of characters and they tend to take one character trait and put it up to 11 for a scene to make it funnier. This having the caveat of making them one-dimensional by proxy. Little side point, but people criticise Family Guy for having politically charged humour, which I don't really get because it's always had politically charged humour since it began.
Mr. President, I present to you Peter Griffin.
I do find that since we live in such a fast-moving world, the political humour in Family Guy can be susceptible to aging badly. However, believe it or not, the world Family Guy was made for isn't the world we live in anymore. And as a result, the writing had to change over time to adapt. Rather than it being relatable, like how it was in the early 2000s, it uses shock humour now. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. Historically, Family Guy and The Simpsons were made to parody the American dream and the conventional nuclear family, that being your mother, father, the kids and the pet in your suburban neighbourhood in a generic but relatable enough American city. I don't know how to word it without sounding offensive, but I think that we live in a wildly different world now. The American dream has widely been destroyed due to domestic and international issues, and the questioning of the status quo has been higher than ever. Families are not homogenous anymore, and they never were, and media is now just more diverse. We have become numb to what made the likes of Family Guy and The Simpsons stick out. It's not new anymore, and you saw it with the Cleveland show flopping. Trying to emulate the same premise as Family Guy just doesn't work, because parodying the American dream just isn't as surprising and as funny as it initially was. And whether or not you want to admit it, American Dad has always been in the shadow of Family Guy, despite it being closer to what the people who criticize Family Guy want Family Guy to be. The general audiences just don't reciprocate that same notion. I compared Family Guy to South Park earlier, but I think that those shows aren't as comparable as Family Guy and The Simpsons. Both of them are very compatible, hence why they had a crossover. I have the opinion that The Simpsons fell off entirely. I've never been that fond of the show. However, despite that, I found earlier seasons to be genuinely endearing, and I think that some of those episodes are peak television, but I find that as it has been running, it's genuinely lost most of its appeal, and I'm not the only one echoing that sentiment. A lot of other people feel the exact same, and it could be its own video. One of the main points against The Simpsons is that it has a strange relationship with its humour. It was funny when it came out because it was counterculture, but in the modern day, it isn't counterculture at all. Referring back to Family Guy, Family Guy's humour changed a long time ago to be more short-formed and compact, which requires me to talk about the technology that impacted Family Guy. It's been established by me that Family Guy got revived due to high DVD sales, and at the time Family Guy was revived, circa early 2000s, DVDs were bingeable, and classic Family Guy had a more laid-back approach to humour, which naturally led itself to being more bingeable. What I mean by a laid-back approach to humour was that the humour in Family Guy was more relatable, and the clips in Family Guy you'd watch in classic episodes would be like, haha, you did the odd cutaway gag, but you'd be like, haha, that's relatable, I relate to that. Whereas in modern Family Guy with shock humour, you'd be more like, haha, what the fuck? And then if you really wanted to get into the nitty and gritty, you could have rented from your local rental shop. It was incentivized back then to binge if you rented DVDs. And then after Family Guy was revived, people slowly noticed it starting to quote-unquote fall off. However, I pose the question to you, referring back to the quote-unquote falling off thing, is that because the medium it became popular on wasn't the medium it needed to be on to succeed? Like I inferred, Family Guy needed to succeed on cable to continue airing. DVD sales were not enough on its own. Not to mention, DVDs are a one-off release and extra revenue after a season's been wrapped up. It is not financially viable to base your entire TV show around DVD sales. But cable television is a really interesting world. I always remembered flicking through several channels at once to see something I wanted to watch, and oftentimes you'd pick up on an episode of a show halfway through. Serialized shows were not that big of a thing. And in the exceptions like Lost, you had to get everyone to tune in at the exact same time. And here's my money shot argument. I believe that the shift in Family Guy's humour heavily favours channel surfing, as you're never far away from a joke, regardless of how well it's been set up. And the graphic imagery sets itself up to keep audiences engaged, which, as I mentioned before, is important with audiences having a decrease in attention span. In the timeline that I've pseudo-created, imagine this period being before streaming, and then after streaming began to get popular around 2011, TV had to adapt to keep people watching. I'm going to argue that 2011 to 2021 is when Family Guy went through a rough patch. Cable's in a rough patch too, but I don't see that ending anytime soon, thankfully. The reason why cable's in a rough patch right now is because streaming offers everything on demand at once. It's pretty much night and day. Also, it's weird because doing research for the video I found out that before streaming took over, there was a weird sudden increase of series with overarching plots. The obvious example being Game of Thrones that began to air in 2011, and then Breaking Bad, despite airing in 2008, but it became incredibly popular when it ended. And then around and during that, we had Netflix create Netflix originals in Lilyhammer and House of Cards, which really ushered in this era of binge watching and being invested in shows, more so than before. Also, cartoons went through a similar thing, which resulted in the cartoon community on YouTube majorly expanding, because fandoms of shows could talk and speculate online, and the cartoon community adored serialized shows, and Family Guy was episodic and had absurdist humour, hence why it wasn't liked very much. Family Guy attempted to change to retain any potential viewers it left for the menagerie of reasons I mentioned earlier on, and then on top of that, the general sentiment of it being stale at that point, and this all culminated to the life of Brian, which ultimately damaged its reputation even more in the long run. And then from that point forward, Family Guy really began to struggle. And during that time, we had other shows like Rick and Morty take off that did have an overarching story to them. However, the premise of that show in particular is interesting because it goes for a different tone than The Simpsons or Family Guy. It took advantage of the fact it was a cartoon and had a sci-fi element to it, which pretty much made the show eligible for longevity without having the problems that The Simpsons had. I feel as if the writing of 2010's cable really perfected the formula of having episodic shows that splice overarching plots. But Family Guy was a late 90s show. How could it possibly survive? I don't think it did. It fell off in popular culture and it was only talked about negatively online. In fact, it still is to a large extent. And most of the debate around the show stems from whether or not it's funny. But in the modern day, you have two groups of people predominantly. I found that through personal research. The average person uses and engages with TikTok, compared to a specialized group of people who use Twitter. And I think that TikTok is the silent majority of social media users. And Family Guy blew up on YouTube in 2019 and 2020, as it was posted on YouTube in short chunks. But no one could have predicted how large Family Guy would have been on TikTok. How TikTok works is that the algorithm is really good at understanding what the viewer wants, and that coupled with the Family Guy clips on there being relatively short, it's a match made in heaven. After 20 years of trials and tribulations, Family Guy's finally found a home on TikTok. The humour fits better on there too. I mentioned it earlier on, but the absurdist quick nature of Family Guy humour makes it pretty much ideal for TikTok, because TikTok humour is absurdist humour and can sometimes be graphic. During the 2010s, YouTube suffered a war of comedy, and whether or not random equaled funny. In 2022, based on what is popular on TikTok, I think it's safe to say that random fast humour is what audiences of today like, which is honestly crazy because Family Guy really was ahead of its time. And even though it stumbled through the 2010s being slandered on YouTube and Twitter, today it's taken over TikTok. And with 21 seasons of content, it's virtually endless. We are living in a Family Guy renaissance. Oh yeah, Family Guy's on Disney Plus in the UK, which is cool, but I don't really think that modern Family Guy's bingeable. But at least it's on there. I also give it 2 years before there's a Family Guy movie at least announced. Your time's coming, Seth. Thank you for watching the video to the end. I've finished school, so I'm a free man. I'll get back to work in the next video, and thank you to Patreon for making this happen. Bye.